welcome to you all in terms of this introductory session on local niche coverage strategies for Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes. Just a short introduction for myself. I was involved as one of the pilots for producing a local niche coverage strategy a couple of years ago, and I think as part of that, I think it really struck me what a kind of a fabulous opportunity this is, and how important these are likely to be in numerous respects, both in respect of planning, but also in terms of guiding funding in terms of how to deliver nature's recovery. It's obviously intended to be one of the key policies to support the government in terms of their legally binding commitment to recover nature's decline, and that is really kind of, we know how fundamentally important that is. But for nature to recover, at the scale that is required, what we do need is obviously targeted, coordinated, and I suppose more importantly collaborative action. I suppose that's at the heart of the local niche recovery strategies intended, is collaborative action. So yes, you will see a kind of a core team today, but in essence this is designed in terms of how to be used by the numerous people that are hopefully going to use this, whether it's you as a developer, whether it's a land manager, whether it's a plan department, or whether it's a parish council. It's there, I think, for everyone to use in a number of respects. So, as you say, this is all about collaborative action, and particularly in the right place. So what this will help us do, and I think that's been my learning, is it will help spatially identify those areas and those locations within the geographical area we're looking at where action to restore nature and to create habitat will be most effective. So for me, that's the beauty of it, and that in itself will then guide whether it be kind of public, private, whether it be biodiversity net gain, whether it be the voluntary sector, and whatever means of funding that will guide our collective action for the greatest, I suppose, collective impact, not just for nature, but for wider environmental benefits as well. So that's my kind of take on it personally in terms of why I think this is so important. So just on the next slide, please, Saatchi. So a bit about who's working on the local niche recovery strategy. So ourselves as Buckinghamshire Council, I'm the lead for Butts Council. In terms of Milton Keynes City Council, we have Phil Snell, who's on the call, have just waved at you. In terms of the our local nature partnership, which is the Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes Natural Environment Partnership, we have Nicola, who is the partnership manager. Now, Nicola will be doing a piece in the middle of the presentation about obviously why our nature is so important and some of the specifics of Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes nature. And we also have Saatchi. Saatchi is our local niche recovery strategy project manager, and you'll be hearing from Saatchi at the end of the presentation in terms of how to get engaged and what we would like to hear from yourself at this point in the process. And from Natural England, we have Sarah. So Sarah will be giving us a bit on the presentation earlier on in terms of what local niche recovery strategies are, and in terms of the process that we're going to follow. So yes, you've got a core team, I suppose, with you today. We have a slightly wider steering group as we kind of steer this project through, which includes our Environmental Records Centre, which includes the Environment Agency, the Wildlife Trust, Milton Keynes Parks Trust, a Conservation Board, the Forestry Commission. So that's kind of our core, but then clearly it recognises that it's going to be multiple other community groups, non-governmental organisations, businesses, developers who are going to be interested and want to contribute to the production of a local niche recovery strategy. And that's what these sessions are about in terms of how you engage and how we want your views in the process. So that just gives an idea of the who's working on it and a little bit about the governance. So just turning quickly to housekeeping. Obviously, you'll be aware that obviously the mics and the cameras are, I suppose, not activated, I think, just to ensure we don't get any background noise. If you could place your questions as we go through, ideally in the Q&A function. If that's not available, because I know some people have had issues with that in previous ones, please then just use the chat and we will then try and pick up the questions as we go. If not, we will pick them up in the Q&A session at the end. So the session is being recorded. just so that we can kind of post it out to those who did sign up, unable to attend, but who clearly want to find out a little bit more about local niche recovery strategies. There will be a Q&A session at the end where we will just pick up your questions. And one other minor thing, we will run a couple of interactive polls as we run through. We will post the links in the chat, or if you would rather use your smartphone, then there'll be a QR code for you to do it that way. And at the end, we will send out some links in terms of how to sign up for future engagement in the process, and also as well as an FAQ on the back of today's session. So just turning out to the agenda in terms of what we're going to cover. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah to start with in terms of setting out what the local niche recovery strategy is, why does it matter, a bit about how it fits in and how it's envisaged to be delivered. We'll then hand over to Nicola from the Local Nature Partnership, who will cover a bit about the importance of nature in Buckinghamshire, kind of particularly thinking at a strategic scale and some of the habitats that are kind of most important in our geographical area. And then I suppose we will then hand over to Saatchi, who will talk about obviously yourselves as developers in terms of how the information we would like from you at this point in time, in terms of how you would like to use the document and what is going to be of use to you, and how you can get involved in the local niche recovery strategy as we kind of progress through its development. And then we'll finish with a Q&A session at the end. So that completes my kind of opening introduction, some of the housekeeping agenda. We'll just do a very quick poll now before I hand over to Sarah. And this is a bit of a temperature check in terms of your understanding of local niche recovery strategies, in terms of what do you know about them already, what's your knowledge, extensive knowledge, local niche recovery strategies, and in terms of their importance. So if you could be kind enough to either follow the link in the chat or use the QR code, this just gets us a feel of that level of knowledge of what local niche recovery strategies are, and how I suppose we can hopefully improve and enhance on that, firstly through this session, but as we then progress through the strategy's production. So at that point, whilst you're completing that, we will post the results in the chat. I will hand over to Sarah, who will cover what a local niche recovery strategy is.
Great, thanks, David. Yeah, as David said, I'm Sarah from Natural England, and my role is to help guide Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes through this process. Next slide, please. So local nature recovery strategies are new strategies for nature, and they're legally required by the Environment Act. So every part of England will have an LNRS, and as you have probably gathered, our local LNRS covers both Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes. It also sits within a wider context of environmental policy. So up here on the slide, we have the Environmental Improvement Plan. So this was updated about 6 months ago. And that plan indicates that LNRSs are a really key mechanism for helping to achieve our environmental goals for the UK, including, so you can see that diagram of the goals on the right-hand side. And I just wanted to point out that apex goal. So they're all working towards this goal of thriving plants and wildlife. The LNRS, as we're writing it, will be kind of taking account of these national goals. They all also have a series of objectives and targets relating to each goal. And we're expecting some more guidance from government on how the LNRS needs to take into account those goals. And which ones we should be looking at in particular. But nevertheless, the local nature recovery strategy will most certainly be working towards that goal of thriving plants and wildlife. Next slide, please. So what exactly is the LNRS? It's a collaborative process, and the output has two parts to it. So there's a written part called the Statement of Biodiversity Priorities. And that's going to cover what nature, what nature do we already have in the area? Priorities, so what are the top things that we want for nature in our area? And also measures, which is what exactly do we need to do to deliver those priorities? Then the second part is a map that's called the local habitat map. And again, there's an element of looking at what we've already got, particularly in terms of sites that are already protected for nature conservation. And then also looking at where we can implement those priorities and measures that we collectively agree through this process. Where should we implement those to make the biggest difference, both to nature and also where they can bring other environmental benefits? So we're really looking at where we can kind of get the biggest bang for our buck. Also, just to note that there might be measures in the LNRS that apply to kind of across the area. So we can still include those, but obviously they don't need to be mapped because they don't relate to a specific area, or there isn't kind of somewhere where they'd provide way more benefits than somewhere else. You'll notice the little yellow strip at the top there, pilot LNRS. So this is the first time that LNRSs have been prepared. It is very early days, but just to flag that Buckinghamshire without Milton Keynes was one of 5 pilot areas. And the purpose of the pilots was really to help DEFRA to test this process, and the feedback from that has gone into the now published regulations and guidance. Nevertheless, through that process, there was over 1,000 stakeholder responses, 54 priorities were identified, and there was also some mapping work to look at where action for nature recovery might be best placed. So it was a pilot, it was never intended, and it's not a finished product. But having said that, we will review the work that was done and the inputs that went into that, kind of see if they're still relevant, and make sure that we are integrating those with the inputs that we get from this LNRS process as well. So we will be taking account of the pilot data, but the kind of exact methodologies that we use and the format of the end product may well be different. Next slide, please. So this just shows the process for preparing the LNRS. The steps down the left-hand side of that diagram are the steps that will lead to the local habitat map. And on the right-hand side are those that will lead to the statement of biodiversity priorities. So that's the written part. And just to quickly talk you through them, step 1 is that mapping of areas that are already of importance for biodiversity. So our designated sites. Step 3 is describing the strategy area. So that's what nature have we already got in the area, but a kind of written description and maybe a bit wider than just those protected sites. Step 4, agreeing those priorities and measures. So like I said, that's collective, and when I'm saying that we're agreeing them, it's not just that kind of core group that David referenced. You know, we want kind of people and businesses across the area to get involved in this. And step 5, putting that on a map. So what does that mean geographically? I did deliberately miss out step 2 because the LNRS will need to be reviewed every 3 to 10 years, and that's when step 2 comes in, which is basically mapping what's happened in between. So what steps have we, like what has been done for nature recovery from this very first LNRS to the review, and then so on each time it gets reviewed. And for this first LNRS, the whole process is expected to take about 12 to 18 months. Moving on. So this is just a very kind of high level example to walk you through. So in terms of the priorities that we're agreeing, that's the what do we want for nature? So for example, that could be more woodland. The measure, the how, might be tree planting to expand and connect existing woodland. And then we need to map that. So where is it going to happen? If we're connecting and expanding existing woodland, then we need to know where that existing woodland is. That will obviously dictate the location a bit. But we could also think about tree planting or woodland creation, perhaps around or near to towns, to provide benefits like cleaner air, shade, local cooling. maybe even recreation. Next slide, please. So why does the LNRS matter? As I've mentioned, it's all sort of stemming from legislation, from government policy, and it also ties in with quite a lot of stuff that's either new or coming up. So biodiversity net gain is at the top there, and I'm sure of interest to many of you. You are probably aware it's a new policy. It will require development to increase biodiversity by 10%. The emphasis of that is very much delivering on site, but it's also anticipated that a lot of that, or part of that, will be delivered off site. And the LNRS will be really key to determining where those sites are and what should possibly happen on site as well. And the way that the biodiversity net gain metric is prepared, there's an incentive to deliver net gain that would deliver the LNRS. There's also the strengthened biodiversity duty on public authorities stemming from the Environment Act. So public authorities need to consider what they can do to conserve and enhance biodiversity and to agree and enact policies to achieve that. So the LNRS could form a really helpful blueprint for that as well. The local nature recovery strategies have been designed with the planning system in mind, and local planning authorities will need to have regard to LNRS. We're waiting again, further guidance from government on exactly what that looks like, but there's kind of definitely an ambition there for it to be integrated with the planning system. The next bullet point down, environmental land management schemes, or ELMS, are a new system of government grants for farmers and other land managers to support delivery of environmental targets and benefits. So things like improved water and air quality, increased biodiversity. And that's also expected to be one of the delivery mechanisms by which the LNRS can be implemented. And finally, there's kind of a whole host of potential funding that could help to deliver the local nature recovery strategy once it is prepared. There's those kind of emerging markets like biodiversity net gain, also things like carbon credits, as alongside other kind of public and private sector funding and things like charitable grants as well. Next slide, please. So what are we talking about when we say nature? Nature includes habitats such as wetlands, woodlands, grasslands, and many more. Species like specific animals or plants or fungi. But nature also includes that wider landscape and things like water, geology, and soils. And those are really important because they dictate which habitats and species can actually exist where. And also just to kind of note that nature doesn't just exist in the countryside. So we'll be thinking about both rural and urban nature throughout this process. Next slide. So why is healthy nature important? Hopefully you'll agree that nature is good for its own sake. It has inherent value, but it also provides us with a whole host of benefits that are actually essential for us to live and thrive. And those are known as ecosystem services. So as shown on this slide, they're generally grouped into 4 different types: cultural services, goods or provisioning services, regulating services, and supporting services. But basically they include things like giving us nice places to live and work and socialise, giving us the things that we need from nature, like food and water and medicine and other raw materials, giving us clean air and water. And then those supporting bits are kind of the processes that keep nature healthy so that it can provide all of this other stuff for us as well. So for developers in particular, raw materials, so those goods are going to be really important. And then in terms of that kind of less tangible side, healthy nature and having a could lead to a pleasant environment to live and work, so it will attract residents, workers, businesses, and can also increase property values as well. So now I will move on, pass on to Nicola, who's going to give you a quick tour of the nature in Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, a reminder, I'm Nicola Thomas. I'm the Partnership Manager for the Bucks and Milton Keynes Natural Environment Partnership, or the NEP for short, and was also involved in the pilot Bucks LNRS. So Sarah's outlined what the LNRS is, its links to wider government policy, and my role here is to give you a bit more information on why we are putting a strategy together to recover nature. So I'll go through some of the sort of key habitats and species we have, a little tour around Bucks and Milton Keynes, and point out some of the reasons why they matter, but also acknowledge the threats that they face. And then we can look at what we can all do to help with all of that, which is where the LNRS comes in, and essentially your input to that process. At the end of this section, we will be asking you what nature recovery means to you. So it might be something you want to consider as you go. So we are required to sort of come up with a collaborative view on what nature recovery means. Hence, we're asking lots of different stakeholder groups. So please do have a think about that as we go through these slides, and there'll be an opportunity to follow a link or a QR code to give us your opinion at the end of my section. Okay. So let's go through some of those sort of key habitats and species. So this slide, just a sort of an overview of the kind of land cover in terms of broad categories in Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes, to show really some of the similarities and differences. So around 2/3 of the land cover is taken up with cultivated land or amenity and improved grassland. So the proportions vary slightly within Bucks and Milton Keynes, but essentially it's 2/3 of the land cover. Some differences you can pick out with some of the other percentages. So for example, in Bucks, slightly more woodland, trees, scrub and hedgerows than in Milton Keynes, and Milton Keynes, as you probably expect, is more built up. But there are necessarily, there are a variety of habitats and land use, and that's really what this is essentially telling us. So let's look in a bit more detail at some of those key habitats and species and benefits from nature. So just coming on to our first sort of example habitat, if you like, of woodland. So we have woodland in patches right the way across Bucks and Milton Keynes, including ancient woodland, such as the Ashridge Estate, which is where this photo was taken. We've also got former Royal Hunting Forest examples as well in Burnwood and Whittlewood, etc. Some of the species that those areas support include rare species of mammals like the hazel dormouse and bats, and some rare butterflies. In terms of individual tree species, within the Aylesbury Vale, there is the black poplar, which is a nationally significant population there of that particularly rare and nationally declining species. Wider benefits of woodlands and trees, aside from providing essential habitats for wildlife, clearly a source of timber, so raw material, carbon capture, they provide shade, improve air quality, and planted in the right place in the right way, they can reduce flood risk and soil erosion. So let's move on to another sort of key habitat of the area, looking at the Chilterns landscape, which itself is specialised and fragile. Just wanted to pick out the chalk grassland, which is a managed landscape and hosts a number of specialised plants such as orchids, as well as rare butterflies again, and some invertebrates. And it's also where you'll find the county flower of Buckinghamshire, the Chilterns gentian. In terms of wider benefits, pollinator services is one that comes to mind, particularly looking at this photo. We all need our pollinators for crop growth and growth of plants everywhere. And obviously Chilterns is a very big visitor attraction. So for health and well-being and recreation, you know, that's what that habitat provides too. So staying with the Chilterns, we'll just move on and point out another really special habitat of chalk streams like the river chest, which is shown here. So chalk streams are internationally rare. Most of the world's chalk streams are found in England, and many of them are actually in the Chilterns. And they have some unique properties which support a range of aquatic plants like watercress, animals like the water vole, fish populations such as brown trout, and aquatic invertebrates. And as well as being really special for wildlife, clearly that chalk streams are a very beautiful place to spend time, and therefore provide health and well-being benefits to all as well. Staying with the water environment, we'll just move on. Another habitat. Let's think about rivers and all the associated water and wetland habitats that we have in our area. So I'm thinking about some of the large river systems, such as the Great Ouse, the Tame, the Ray, and the River Thames as well, down in the southern part of Bucks, forming the border there, but also thinking about the wider water network, so all the other water bodies and tributaries, streams, ponds, the slow flowing brooks in the Aylesbury Vale, and associated wetlands. Really important for wildlife, fish, plants, invertebrates, and those wetlands as well, very important for certain species of birds. For example, around the Upper Ray, we see important numbers of lapwing and curlew on the floodplain meadow grassland there. Wider benefits, clearly rivers are a source of water, wetlands can help manage that flood risk, and waterscapes of all types are really important to attract visitors again for health, well-being and recreation. And as Sarah said, we need to remember that nature occurs everywhere, including in the urban environment. So just moving on to the next slide to emphasise really that urban nature is also really important. And what we mean there by urban nature is everything from gardens and parks to street trees. Why are they important? Well, they provide all the benefits that I've described in some of the other slides, but on our doorstep, local climate regulation, shade, also better air quality, perhaps noise barriers might be more important within some of the urban areas. They again attract pollinators, just make places more attractive areas to live and work. So that's a kind of whistle-stop tour of some of the key habitats and species in Bucks and Milton Keynes. There's many more that I could have mentioned, such as hedgerows, traditional orchards, some of our arable field margins with rare arable weeds, ancient box woodland, for example, and some really beautiful protected areas, whether that be up in the Milton Keynes area or down in Buckinghamshire. There's plenty to take into account and to see. So moving on to the next slide, main message from me is that nature is all around us. It's really precious and it provides benefits to all of us. However, as we all know, it's under threat. We're actually in the middle of a mass extinction event globally, and in the UK, 41% of our species have declined over recent decades. Within our local area of Bucks and Milton Keynes, all our chalk streams need improvement, and our area is losing plant species at a higher rate than most other countries. Why is that? Well, these pressures that are on nature operate at all different scales. So globally, of course, climate change, the warmer, wetter winters, hotter, drier summers will lead to changes in the types of species that can survive. The resilience of our landscapes therefore becomes really important. Climate change obviously also could bring in different types of pests and diseases, which could harm habitats and species. There are development pressures in our area across Bucks and Milton Keynes. More housing and other types of development could lead to habitat loss or increasing fragmentation of areas of habitat. And obviously the population increase with more people coming into the area could increase demand for resources such as the water supply and an increase in waste and pollution. And we also need to be really careful about how we manage our land, particularly around water systems, which can affect water quality or water hydrology. And also we need to be careful about how any changes in land ownership could affect some habitats and potentially lead to fragmentation and less resilient landscapes. So lots of threats to nature. However, there's a lot of work that's already being done to address some of those challenges through many of our partner organisations and others across Bucks and Milton Keynes, and we do recognise that. And the LNRS will form a strategic plan so that all these and future efforts are effectively working together towards a common set of goals and priorities for maximum impact. So moving to the next slide. This is your opportunity now, so to tell us what nature recovery means to you. So please follow the link in the chat, or if you prefer, use the QR code on the screen, and that will take you through to an opportunity to tell us what you think nature recovery means. So whilst you do that, I'll just go through what's on this slide. And so the yellow box there is actually our kind of working definition as a steering group, a core group, and some of our initial working groups have come up with this definition that we'd love to hear from you about. So we've emphasised working together, we've emphasised repairing and creating resilient habitats and landscapes. We've emphasised more wildlife, but also wider benefits across Bucks and Milton Keynes. We are required to come up with a definition together, so we do need to hear from you here. So if you've got any thoughts to add, what that term means to you, nature recovery, and what you think about when you think about recovering nature in our area, please do add your thoughts. We will pick them up and use them in that working definition. So Saatchi will be keeping an eye on the answers that come back from you in that poll at the moment. And with that, I will pass you over to Saatchi, who's going to talk to you about how you can get involved with the LNRS process. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicola. So I'm Saatchi. I am the project manager for the LNRS in Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes. Just looking at the results of the poll, we have a response that says habitats created needs to be maintained in habitats created need to be maintained in the long term, building back the natural habitat, repair of habitats to encourage new and existing wildlife. Great. Thanks so much for your responses. Prioritizing habitats with habitat recovery under threat. Absolutely. Thank you so much for your responses. Please do keep them coming. We will look at all your responses after this webinar and find ways to incorporate them into this collective definition that we're looking to put together for nature recovery and what that means in Bucks and Milton Keynes. So yes, again, thanks for your time this afternoon. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about why you might want to get involved in the LNRS and how you could do so. So number one, biodiversity net gain. You heard a lot about it already, but essentially BNG will have a direct impact on all new developments, and the LNRS will identify local areas where nature priorities could be met and therefore will influence things like where off-site BNG sites can be placed. So identifying opportunities on your existing developments, for example, by becoming a part of this LNRS process can really help you plan for the future. Next, supporting our understanding of the best format for you in terms of usability of the spatial map, as well as the list of priorities, is sort of key for both of us. We would like to create a product that is of use to you, and so by getting involved in this process, you can have a chance to tell us what sort of functionality and formats you would like to see that would kind of support your work. We've seen the consumers are increasingly invested in environmental sustainability and want the businesses that they patronage to imbue these values. Showing that you're part of this process and determining priorities for nature in your local area demonstrates this to your customers. It's also been proven that developments that have green spaces have fared better in terms of buyer interest and property value. And the requirements for environmental sustainability within business as well as sustainability standards are increasingly becoming a norm. So participating in the LNRS process will help you have a voice in how environmental mandates and policies can be applied locally. Ecosystem services, lack thereof, we've heard a lot about that in the last 30 minutes or so. and they can cause both significant disruptions and support for new developments. For example, nature-based solutions can help us regulate the impact of floods, which might otherwise impact your developments and the sort of construction processes. Ultimately, preserving nature around you has a myriad of benefits, and we really do hope that you will want to be a part of the process and have your say in how it's managed in your local area or wherever it is that your developments are. The LNRS, again, will have a direct impact on how nature is managed in the area. So this is really your chance to participate in telling us what you would like to see and ensuring that we incorporate those into the priorities for the LNRS. So a couple of quick ways, and again, this is a question for you as much as it is certain opportunities that we are able to provide at this point in time of the process. So just to say that we're at an early stage in developing the LNRS. Yes, we've done a pilot, and yes, we will use the inputs and the outputs of that pilot in this process as well, but we're looking to engage a much wider set of stakeholders, including those from Milton Keynes this time around. So we are in the early stage of developing the final LNRS and would like your views on which parts of nature are most important to preserve, improve, restore, whether there are certain ecosystem service benefits that are particularly valuable for your businesses, for your work, and you know, how we should take these into consideration. This will inform a series of priorities for nature. So if you can take a really quick survey today and provide your opinion on these matters, that would be really helpful for us. The link is in the chat and the QR code is on the screen. It's a really quick survey. If you can encourage others to do the same as well, that would be fantastic. And we'll also email this out to you so you can forward it to your colleagues as well. We will be hosting 2 stakeholder consultation group meets for developers, which will meet for about 2 hours in November of this year and June of next year to review the LNRS as this is an iterative process and ensure that your priorities for nature are being considered adequately in the document and in the spatial map. So if you are interested in being a part of these consultation groups, again, if you can let us know via the survey, that would be fantastic. If you're interested in understanding in the future how you might be able to become LNRS delivery partners, whether it's through BNG or other funding mechanisms, please do log your interest through the survey as well, and we'll send out information as and when we have it. Again, we really want to know from you how you would like to be engaged, how we can curate and format the LNRS so that it meets your needs. So do, again, please tell us how you would like to be engaged, again, through the survey. I'm now going to move on to the Q&A section of this webinar. So if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat and we'll address them over the next 20 minutes or so. And if we're unable to get to any of your questions, rest assured we will email you with answers and as well as the recording of this webinar, the survey and some other information. So just taking a look at the Q&A. Thanks so much for your questions. There are a lot of questions about BNG, so David and Phil, I'm going to send these your way. So these include, how is it envisaged that developments can secure offsite BNG to the sites identified within the LNRS? There's another question about, are there any updates on when the BNG legislation is likely to come into force, and will the LNRS be updated to incorporate this? So let's start with those 2.
Okay, so really good questions. So you're right. So the 2 should in theory work absolutely in partnership in terms of local nature recovery strategy and biodiversity net gain as a policy. So, looking ahead, the local nature recovery strategy will guide where off-site biodiversity net gain should be located within a geographical area, and obviously the way the metric works, that it will produce an uplift, I suppose, to reward those areas that have been identified in the local nature recovery strategy. So, ahead of that time, we as an authority have produced some interim guidance on what strategic significance is, i.e. making sure that any off-site net gains are going in the right places geographically. But the fundamental link between the two, you're absolutely right to kind of point out, and that's where I suppose the value of the strategy is in place, and where hopefully habitat bank providers, i.e. those that are looking to deliver large-scale habitat banks, they're looking in the correct places to deliver biodiversity net gain. In terms of an update on the legislation, obviously we know that mandatory net gain is going to start in November of this year. Obviously the government has announced that. Some guidance has come out. The secondary regs, you're right, are awaited. But obviously in terms of for most development, obviously mandatory biodiversity net gain will start in November. Certainly obviously for Milton Keynes and Buckinghamshire, obviously we've already adopted supplementary planning documents in terms of biodiversity net gain to support the existing local plans. But we're expecting over the next month or so for the remaining guidance and support mechanisms to be put in place. So I hope that answers the biodiversity net gain, because they are such an important crossover between the two.
Thanks, David. There's the question about whether the LNRS will also cover matters such as water neutrality, and if so, in what way? Sarah, can I pass that to you, please?
Yeah, sure. So I think water neutrality specifically is more to be managed through the kind of the planning process, although, as we mentioned, the two do very much link together. But I guess there could be other things like nutrient neutrality, for example, where although you'd still have to go through the process that has been set out by Natural England, it could be that actually that coincides, and that actions taken to deliver that could also deliver the LNRS. So that kind of could be a delivery mechanism. So I hope that answers your question, but do drop another note if not.
Great, thanks, Sarah. There is a question in chat about that says our clients would like to bring forward a SANG, which is a sustainable alternative natural green space, as part of the promotion of a site for residential allocation in the new local plan. What is the best way to engage with stakeholders in terms of details that proposed SANG, and how can it align with the LNRS for Bucks? David?
Thank you. So really good question. I suppose about that, but also I suppose how the local nature recovery strategy, I suppose, fits with local development plans in terms of what the process is. So we have members of the planning policy team sitting, I suppose, on the local nature recovery strategy steering group to make sure that we've got those fundamental links in place in terms of what we're developing here, and then obviously as the evidence base to help support the local plans. Obviously within Buckinghamshire, we're at the kind of the start of our local plan process, so the timing works really well in this being an evidence base in terms of informing the local plan process. So what I'd say is, Robert, drop us an email after this. We can put you in touch with our planning policy colleagues in terms of who are working on SANGs, who are also sitting on the local nature recovery strategy steering group, and we can kind of put you in touch with the right person, so you've kind of got that point of contact. But good question. I hope that kind of picks up between the link between local nature recovery strategy and planning, because I could see there was another question on that within the chat. And I think just on that, recognising that fundamental link, we are awaiting more detailed guidance from government in terms of those exact mechanisms between which the local niche recovery strategy and all those planning tools, whether it be policy, development management, how they interact together. So we're awaiting that detailed guidance just to give the specifics. So I hope that captures that point as well. Thanks, Archie.
Great, thank you, David. There's another question about where developers can offer land for habitat enhancement. Is there a management body with funding to adopt and maintain this as part of the LNRS? Sarah, can I pass that to you, please?
Yeah, sure. So that would be something that would be done sort of bespoke on a project by project basis. So there isn't like a kind of central LNRS management body or a kind of central body that will fund and deliver the LNRS. It's kind of a combination of lots of different mechanisms. So yeah, it would be bespoke, and it would depend on the situation and the site, and that would be something for you as the developer to kind of find that agreement and find the appropriate body.
Just to add to that, David, in terms of that particular question, obviously, as a local planning authority, I think we're in discussion with a number of what I would call habitat bank providers who are either own land themselves, or they are working with either developers or landowners to bring land forward to deliver habitat creation as part of biodiversity net gain and to get on the national register. So there's a variety of mechanisms whereby that's happening. So again, I think if you've got specific queries on that in terms of biodiversity net gain, land that you might be interested, again, drop us an email and we can just have a perhaps more detailed conversation on that one.
Thanks, Sarah and David. If there are any other questions, may I please request you to put them in the Q&A section, the chat. Right now we have a couple more minutes to answer questions. And of course, you're welcome to reach out as well later on if you have any other questions. So let's give it a couple minutes in case anybody has any more questions at the moment. And again, just to reiterate, we really request you to please take the survey and give us some feedback on what you think are priorities for nature in the area and how you would like to get involved in the LNRS process. Okay, so if there are no more questions, I think on just behalf of the group, I'd just like to really thank you for your attendance today, for your interest. I hope you're shared in our passion for obviously restoring nature and the journey, I suppose, that we're about to undergo and how you can be a part of that. As just reinforcing Saatchi's point, please do fill in the survey. How do you want to use the strategy? What's it's going to be used for you in terms of as a developer? Because obviously fundamentally you're kind of linked into this in terms of net gain, so on and so forth, and how you plan your development. So thank you for your attendance, and we look forward to your continued engagement as we kind of move along this journey. And we will send out an email on the back of this with some FAQs and a link to the recording. So thank you for your time and thank you for your interest.